Hello students and welcome to this course MEG 8 New Literatures in English. This is block 2 and we are going to be doing A Grain of Wheat by the Kenyan author Ngugi wa Thiong'o. My name is Dr. Madhumita Chakraborty and I am an associate professor at Delhi University. So before we start our discussion on Ngugi, we would like to just tell you about Africa and its perception as the dark continent. Why is Africa known as the dark continent? The whole idea of dark means something negative and something, exotic in a way, and therefore we see it as a binary to white, to good. So good versus bad, white versus dark. So the early missionaries who came to Africa and the early travelers who came to Africa, they considered as dark anything which was mysterious and which they did not have much understanding about. So these visitors considered Africa to be, full inhabited by people who were primitive, people who were uncivilized, people who were so-called savages, people who were ignorant, and black darkness becomes symbolic of this kind of ignorance. Also, according to these early missionaries, Africans believed in magic and so-called irrational rituals and customs. And this kind of magic also they associated with some kind of voodoo or black magic, and which is why they gave the term black magic. And of course, the most obvious reason, dear listeners, for calling Africa the dark continent was the dark skin of these inhabitants. Now, these opinions, particularly, which we see about Africans being primitive, being uncivilized, this was accepted blindly by most Europeans, and who we call the WASP, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. They believed this blindly, and they came to this continent either for trade purposes or for colonization purposes. We'll talk more about the colonization purpose in a bit, but what stands out is that all these colonial administrations which came to Africa, they stressed upon the primitivism or the lack of knowledge that Africans possessed, and they created this image, they constructed this image of Africa as a dark continent without any history, without any culture, and without any past of its own. So when African writers began to write, their primary aim was to counter this Eurocentric view of Africa that had been presented. They wanted to counter the white man's view of Africa that had been presented, and therefore they wanted, through their writings, to depict that African civilization was not one long night of savagery. They wanted to say that unlike the Europeans who perceived Africa as the dark continent, a world of savagery, cannibalism, slavery, primitive rituals, customs, where nothing positive seemed visible, and therefore where the Europeans had considered their responsibility, or what they called the white man's burden, their sacred duty, to civilize the savages. The African writers particularly tried to counter this narrative by their own narrative, which was not one long night of savagery. And how? Research. Research has proven that Africa was neither primitive nor uncivilized before the Europeans came to occupy it. In fact, Africa is known as the cradle of civilization. Ancient Africa had various centers of civilization, centers of culture, which were very well organized social systems. They had very well organized political systems. They had achievements in various fields. Of course, it was an unequal society. Patriarchy ruled there. Gender discrimination was there. However, women did hold significant positions. Women worked alongside the men in the farms. Many women were also leaders of their own tribes, and there was a balance. So while patriarchy did exist in the household, there were spaces where both men and women were equals. When the Europeans came, they conveniently forgot all this in their attempts to construct the world according to their outlook. These Europeans, which came from, they were the Dutch, the British, the Portuguese, they came to Africa, they plundered, looted the African nations, brought these countries to their knees, and ended up destroying their rich history and cultural heritage. The role and the position that women traditionally had enjoyed in these societies was conveniently forgotten and left out of all histories, leaving the impression that women's emancipation in Africa was synonymous with colonialism, and that women in all non-Western societies were oppressed creatures, were servile creatures, and it was organized religion. It was organized religion like Christianity that would bring them civilization and progress. One of the most significant people who was the pioneer in countering the Eurocentric view of Africa was Cheikh Anta Diop. Cheikh Anta Diop was a Senegalese scholar and a politician. He did research over a number of years to gather evidence from various sources which showed how the ancient Egyptian civilization had African origins. He wrote about this in his book called The Origin of African Civilization, Myth or Reality. In this book, Cheikh Anta Diop says, ancient Egypt was a Negro civilization. The history of Black Africa will remain suspended in air and cannot be written correctly until African historians dare to connect it with the history of Egypt. So, when Cheikh Anta Diop was writing, he stated that when the Great Sahara, which is now the Sahara Desert as we know, started drying up around 7000 BC, before which it used to be a huge lake, a section of Africans began to trek along the routes of the river Nile. These people finally settled in a valley at the mouth of the Nile Delta, where the river emptied its waters into the Mediterranean. And it was these people, according to Cheikh Anta Diop, who set up the great ancient Egyptian civilization with unprecedented progress in speculative scientific research. This cycle of civilizational progress, he says, lasted many years, many thousands of years in fact. And during this period, a lot of the Black Africans actually ended up colonizing territories that were inhabited by white populations. And so he says that the Semitic world that we have today is perhaps a result of free crossbreeding between both these races. Now, of course, like often happens, like many other ancient civilizations, this civilization that was set up by black Africans in the Nile Valley soon ran out of steam. Over a period of time, the Persians, the Macedonians, the Romans, the Arabs, the Turks, and more recently, the French and the British came to this area and occupied the territory. So this prolonged colonization that we had resulted in the gradual snapping of the links between the delta and the original centers of the civilization back in Africa. And who benefited out of this? Europe benefited from the ancient Egyptian civilization via the Greeks and the Romans. So over a period of time, this dynamic, strong African culture began to lag behind in technological progress, whereas in contrast, Europe began to march ahead in full steam. There were great empires in Africa. Empire of Ghana, Empire of Mali, Empire of Ife, all of these in West Africa. The Ethiopian Empire in the east, Zimbabwe in the south, and Congo in the southwest. All of these empires bear testimony to the great civilization that Africans built many, many thousands of years ago. So the hypothesis that Sheikh Anta Diop set out to explain, it establishes beyond any doubt that ancient Africa at that point of time was as much primitive or developed, as much barbaric or civilized as any other part of the world, including Europe. It therefore proves false the opinion that the European powers created that Africa was this savage, primitive place, and it was their white man's burden to civilize the savages. So European colonizers, of course, had been coming to Africa for a very long time. Vasco da Gama, we all are aware of him. He was one of the first to reach there around the 15th century when the Portuguese set up rest and recuperation stations, when the Portuguese also set up military garrisons on the west coast of the Atlantic and the east coast of the Indian Ocean. They were, of course, led, as I just told you, by Vasco da Gama. Africa was the transit point between the west and the east, or what was then called the Orient. In subsequent centuries, in subsequent centuries, as the naval supremacy of France and Great Britain increased after the defeat of the Spanish Armada at the end of the 16th century, these countries too began to enter Africa to explore its interiors for economic exploitation. And by the end of the 19th century, more European powers had come to the continent. As more and more European powers came to the continent, they started fighting amongst themselves. That among them, who would proclaim supremacy over various parts of Africa. So in this regard, a conference was held in 1884. This was called the Berlin Conference. The Berlin Conference regulated European colonization and trade in Africa. And this conference is usually accepted as the starting point or the beginning of what we now call the Scramble for Africa. The Scramble for Africa was also called the Partition of Africa or the Conquest of Africa. It was an invasion, an annexation, a division, a colonization of most of Africa by 7 European powers during a very short period of time between 1881 and 1914. So we have to remember that even in 1870, which was just 11 years prior to this, only 10% of Africa had been under formal European control. By the time 1914 came around, 90% of the African continent was colonized. Only Ethiopia and Liberia remain independent for the time being. With the Berlin Conference and what happened after that till 1914, the process of colonization of Africa was initiated with common European consent. So, what were the effects of this colonialism in Africa? Colonialism initiated a formal system of othering. The African became the other in their own land. They were now seen through the Eurocentric gaze, and all their previous history, culture, achievements were negated and trampled upon. The colonizers totally disregarded the African culture. They changed anything that was not in their favor, and they made gullible Africans to look at this new culture as revolutionary, as something which was the best. The local language of Africans, their local religions, their names, their education system, the way they dressed, their music, the sports they played, everything was gradually replaced with foreign ones. I mean, the ones of the colonizers. This entire process of change has been articulated in a lot of African novels, but of course, we can see this entire process of change through Achebe's Things Fall Apart, in which he actually shows the change that happens in Nigeria from the pre-colonial to the coming of the colonizers and what happens after that. Colonialism made all colonized countries forever dependent on the colonial masters, and they took all the wealth and all the resources from Africa to their own countries. Now, out of these seven major colonizing powers that were there in Africa, there was also some discontinuity. Why? Because there were primarily two languages that were spoken among the colonizers. So, the way Africa was divided was also in a way among the French-speaking countries and the English-speaking countries. So, the French colonizers, the parts of Africa that they colonized, that became Francophone Africa. And the parts of Africa colonized by the English-speaking countries, primarily Britain, was Anglophone Africa. European colonialism introduced slave trade in Africa, in which they took these cheap slave labor from Africa into their countries where they were made to work as slaves. Also, colonialism reduced the prestige of native African leaders. Any leader who failed to follow colonial diktats were deported, as in they were sent to another country. They were exiled. Sometimes they were even killed. Oba Overamwen, who was the king of Benin, was deported in 1896 after the Berlin Massacre, and he later died in exile. Before the inception of colonialism, the Africans had a type of political system where everybody took part in political decision-making of their state. But when the colonial masters introduced their own system of government, thereby reducing or even negating roles in political decision-making, gradually the power which rested in the people was taken away, and all power now centered upon the colonial masters. So, as I told you right at the beginning, this unit is Ngugi wa Thiong'o's A Grain of Wheat. So, I'm going to give you now a brief introduction about Ngugi wa Thiong'o. Ngugi wa Thiong'o came from Kenya, and of all the British colonies in Africa, Kenya was one of the last which emerged on the literary map. especially of African writings in English. However, Kenya had had a tradition of over 200 years of written literature, primarily poetry, which had been written in Swahili, which was what they called the trade language used in coastal East Africa. The newer Kenyan writers found it difficult to express themselves in Swahili, and they also found it difficult to express themselves through poetry. So hence they took to writing in English, and they chose to write in prose rather than poetry. Ngugi wa Thiong'o is the foremost of Kenyan writers who has almost single-handedly, through his writings, made everyone take serious note of Kenyan literature. So who was Ngugi? Ngugi was born in 1937 in a poor family of landless squatters in Kamithu village near Limuru in Kiambu district, Kenya. So his family did not even have a home of their own. They were landless, they were squatters. His original name was James Ngugi. He attended the missionaries-run Kamandura School in Limuru and later joined the Alliance High School, which was the first fully fledged school for Africans in Kenya. It was here at the Alliance School that Ngugi developed an understanding and, more importantly, an awareness about Christianity. And this is seen through his writings, but it is seen most particularly in the text that we will be discussing, A Grain of Wheat. In 1952, in the month of October, a state of emergency was declared in Kenya. At that point of time, Ngugi did not participate much in the movement. He preferred to continue with his education. This decision that he had taken then gave him a guilt complex later. And that is perhaps one of the major reasons why he made the Mau Mau phrase, the phase of the Mau Mau agitation, the revolution. This was a major phase in Kenyan history, and it is the guilt complex that Ngugi had of not participating in the emergency movement that makes the Mau Mau phase of Kenyan history a repeated theme in his writings. The picture that we see here is of Makerere University, where Ngugi joined after completing his school. Makerere University is located at Kampala in Uganda. He joined this university. He completed his undergraduate degree studies in English. While he was at the university, and even before he completed his graduation, Ngugi had written his first full-length play. This was called The Black Hermit, and this play was performed. Uganda gained independence in 1962. He also wrote his first two novels, Weep Not Child and The River Between, during this period. Weep Not Child was the first novel in English to be published by a writer from East Africa. After completing his studies in Makerere, Ngugi joined Leeds University, which provided him with varying and differing perspectives on life, on socio-political situations, as well as academics. After completing his education at Makerere, Ngugi joined Leeds University in the UK, which provided him with varying and differing perspectives on life, on socio-political situations, as well as academics. It was during his stay at Leeds that A Grain of Wheat was written and published in 1967, and in Ngugi's own words, Leeds systemized my thinking. So this is just, a glimpse of the major works by Ngugi. Weep Not Child, River Between, A Grain of Wheat, Petals of Blood, Devil on the Cross, Matigari, some of his very well-known works, and his plays like The Black Hermit, The Trial of Dedan Kimathi, I Will Marry When I Want. So this is just for reference for what you can see and read in your free time. On his return from England, Gugi joined Nairobi University as a lecturer in the English department. He proposed changes in the syllabus, including the incorporation of literature written in African languages, but they were not accepted. Hence, he resigned from the university in 1969, and this was in protest against university action against students who had been striking for their demands. He then returned to Makerere and helped them to reorganize the English department there, with special focus on world literature rather than English literature. After a short spell in the USA, Gugi returned to Nairobi University in 1971. So he came back to his original workplace. And this time, he was successful in carrying out the changes in his syllabus. The Department of English became the Department of Literature. And this phase between 1972 to 1977 is where Gugi produces a lot of his major literary works, beginning with Homecoming and Other Essays, Secret Lives, a collection of stories, a play, The Trial of Dedan Kimathi, which he wrote together with his colleague Misere Mugo, and of course, Petals of Blood, which is perhaps one of Gugi's best known works till date. It was the writing of Petals of Blood that got Gugi into trouble with the government authorities in Kenya, because it was in this novel that he dealt with the situation in post-independence Kenya. Along with Petals of Blood, Gugi wrote another play, I Will Marry When I Want, with Ngugi wa Thiong'o. This was written in 1977. Soon the authorities, however, objected to it, and its performances were banned very soon, November 16, 1977. A few days later, or rather a couple of weeks later, on 3rd December 1977, Gugi was taken to a police station near his residence, apparently for routine questioning, but he was detained without a trial for almost a year, until 12th December 1978, when he was released as inexplicably as he had been detained. This whole year that Gugi spent in prison, he wrote things on pieces of toilet paper. What did he write? He wrote the details of his routine as a detainee and also the strategies through which he kept his sanity alive in the face of humiliation and torture. This torture was both physical and mental. And all these writings on toilet paper were later published as Detained, a writer's prison diary in 1981. During the time he was in prison, he also wrote the manuscript of his next novel, Devil on the Cross, in Gikuyu. It was a while back, before Gugi went to prison, after Petals of Blood, that he had made this decision to stop writing in English and write in his mother tongue Gikuyu, and we will talk more about that in later slides. After his request to restore his old job was turned down after his release from prison, Gugi moved to England, and a lot of his major works were published from England. Until date, he now lives in the USA. He shuttles between USA and his home country, and he has made it his duty to fight with all those who are fighting for the restoration of democracy in Kenya. So this is a quote from Gugi, and this is a picture of the prison where he was kept. They put me in jail because I had written a work in Gikuyu, my African native language. Nagahika Nadinda was the title of the work in Gikuyu, the performance of which led to my detention. That made me reflect about languages and colonial processes. I decided when I was in jail that English would no longer be the original language of my works, but Gikuyu would. I wrote my first novel, The Devil on the Cross, in this language, in prison, on toilet paper. The prison to me was like a school, and writing became a way for me to cope with my detention. Thank you.